Maria Rodriguez knelt on the cold October pavement, her worn hands trembling as she wrapped her threadbare coat around the shoulders of a terrified little girl she had never met. The child's tears soaked into Maria's uniform, the only decent clothing she owned, as the maid whispered gentle reassurances in a voice weathered by years of invisible labor and quiet suffering. What Maria did not know, could not have known, was that from behind an old oak tree, a pair of eyes watched every tender gesture, every soft word, every selfless moment. Daniel Whitmore, one of the wealthiest men in the city, stood motionless in the shadows, his heart fracturing and mending all at once as he witnessed a poverty-stricken stranger show his daughter the kindness he had been desperately searching for in his world of privilege and suspicion. That single act of grace, offered without hesitation and expecting nothing in return, would set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the trajectory of 3 broken lives. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the pre-dawn darkness of Maria Rodriguez's studio apartment at 4:30 in the morning, a sound that had become the soundtrack of her 34 years of survival. She rose from the sagging mattress on the floor, her body aching from yesterday's labor, and padded across the cold linoleum to silence the noise before it could wake her neighbors in the paper-thin walled building. The apartment, barely larger than some people's closets, held the sparse evidence of a life pared down to its barest essentials. A hot plate sat on a card table. A plastic chair stood guard beside it. A small lamp cast long shadows across walls that had once been white but had faded to a tired gray, much like Maria's own dreams. She moved to the refrigerator, a dented relic that hummed and shuddered through the night, and opened it to find what she already knew would be there. Half a carton of eggs, a nearly empty jar of store-brand peanut butter, a single apple, slightly bruised, 3 bottles of water. She closed the door and leaned her forehead against its cool surface for just a moment, allowing herself this one brief surrender before the day demanded her strength. On the counter, arranged in neat stacks that spoke to a deeper sense of order and dignity, lay her money. Maria counted it with practiced efficiency. $23.47. Rent was due in 5 days. She had already sent this month's payment to her mother in Guadalajara. Money desperately needed for medications that kept her mother's failing heart beating. The math was simple and brutal. She would eat the apple today. The eggs would last through Thursday if she was careful. On the back of her only chair hung her uniform, a gray dress worn smooth at the elbows, and beside it, her coat. The coat had been beautiful once. Now it was a patchwork of poorly sewn repairs, the lining torn, the buttons mismatched, but it was warm, and warmth was a luxury she could not afford to replace. She had been cleaning other people's homes for 8 years now, ever since she had crossed the border with nothing but hope and determination stitched into the hem of her dress. 8 years of scrubbing toilets and polishing floors, 8 years of being looked through rather than at. A ghost in gray who appeared at 9 and vanished by 5, leaving behind only the scent of lemon cleaner and the evidence of her invisible hands. The first house belonged to Mrs. Eleanor Hartwick, a woman who had never once looked Maria in the eye. During the 14 months Maria had cleaned her sprawling colonial every Tuesday morning, Maria scrubbed the master bathroom's marble floors on her hands and knees, while Mrs. Hartwick spoke on the phone mere feet away, discussing her upcoming vacation to the Amalfi Coast, her voice floating over and around Maria as though the maid were simply another piece of furniture. The second house was worse. The Castellanos had 3 young children who treated Maria's presence as an opportunity to create fresh disasters, dropping toys and spilling juice with the careless entitlement of those who had never cleaned anything themselves. Mrs. Castellano followed Maria from room to room with barely concealed suspicion, as though poverty itself were contagious or criminal. But it was the third house, the Peterson residence, where the day finally shattered. Maria was dusting the living room shelves with the careful attention she brought to every task, treating each object as though it were precious, when her cloth caught the edge of a small ceramic vase. It tumbled to the hardwood floor and broke into 4 clean pieces. The vase had been ugly and cheap, the kind of thing bought at a discount store and forgotten. But Mrs. Peterson descended upon the scene like a judge pronouncing sentence. Her voice was cold and sharp as she informed Maria that the vase had been a family heirloom worth at least $200 and that she would be deducting $50 from Maria's pay. Maria's protests died in her throat. She knew the math of power. She needed this job more than she needed justice. She nodded, apologized, and finished her work with trembling hands and burning eyes. By 6:15 in the evening, Maria's entire body felt like a single exposed nerve. Her back screamed from hours of bending. Her knees throbbed from kneeling on hard floors. Her hands were raw from chemicals and hot water. She had one more shift ahead, a restaurant where she washed dishes until midnight. But the bus that would take her there did not leave for another 35 minutes. The park near the bus stop beckoned like an oasis. Maria had not sat down, truly sat down without purpose or task. Since 4:30 that morning, she made her decision with the last drops of her depleting energy reserves and walked toward the cluster of old oak trees, toward the benches that asked nothing of her, toward 30 minutes of peace in a day that had offered none. The park in October was a cathedral of gold and crimson, a place where nature performed its annual miracle of transformation. And for Maria, it was the only sanctuary she could afford. The old oak trees stood like patient guardians, their branches reaching toward a sky painted in shades of fading blue and approaching dusk. Leaves carpeted the ground in layers of copper and amber, crunching softly beneath her feet as she made her way to her bench. The third one from the left, positioned just so that she could see both the playground and the pond. She lowered herself onto the weathered wood with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire day. And for the first time since dawn, she allowed her shoulders to drop, her spine to curve, and her body to simply be without purpose or direction. The bench knew her. She had sat here countless times over the years, during those precious slivers of time between one obligation and the next. With careful reverence, Maria unlaced her second-hand shoes and slipped them off her swollen feet, feeling the cool October air kiss her aching skin through thin socks, worn nearly transparent. From her bag, she retrieved the crust of bread she had saved from her meager lunch, breaking it into small pieces that she scattered on the ground before her. Within moments, sparrows and pigeons appeared, their heads bobbing as they pecked at her offering. And Maria smiled. This small act of generosity, of feeding creatures even hungrier than herself, somehow made her feel less alone in the world. The park hummed with the gentle sounds of early evening. Somewhere beyond the trees, children laughed and shrieked with the unself-conscious joy of those who had never known want. A street vendor's cart perfumed the air with the rich, sweet smell of roasting chestnuts, a scent that reminded Maria of festivals in Guadalajara, of her mother's warm kitchen, of a time before life had become this endless procession of other people's dirt and her own exhaustion. The breeze carried the scent to her bench, and she breathed it in deeply, letting it fill the hollow spaces inside her chest. Here, in this pocket of urban wilderness, Maria was not invisible. The birds saw her, the trees sheltered her. The falling leaves blessed her with their gentle descent. For 30 minutes, she was not a maid or a debtor or a daughter failing to do enough. She was simply Maria, a woman resting on a bench, watching the world turn beautiful in the dying light. The moment of peace shattered like glass. A small figure burst through the curtain of falling leaves, moving with the desperate, uncoordinated speed of pure panic. The little girl was perhaps 7 years old, with blonde curls that bounced wildly around her face as she ran, and even in her terror, even with her features twisted by fear and wet with tears, she was beautiful in the way that well-cared-for children are beautiful. Her clothes spoke of wealth that Maria could scarcely imagine. A navy blue coat with velvet trim, pristine white tights, patent leather shoes that gleamed even as they pounded against the leaf-strewn path. But none of that mattered because the child was utterly, completely terrified. Her voice rose high and broken above the peaceful sounds of the park. A cry that pierced straight through to something primal and aching in Maria's chest. Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. The word became a desperate incantation, repeated with each gasping breath as the girl spun in frantic circles, her small head whipping from side to side, searching for a face that was not there. Other park-goers glanced up with mild concern but continued on their way, perhaps assuming the child's father was nearby, perhaps too wrapped in their own lives to intervene. But Maria was on her feet before conscious thought could even form. Her exhaustion vanished, burned away by an instinct older and deeper than fatigue. She did not think about her bare feet or her worn appearance, or the fact that this child came from a world so different from her own that they might as well have been different species. She only saw what her heart recognized instantly. A child in need. A little one lost and afraid. The girl stumbled near the edge of the pond, her panic making her clumsy, and Maria moved quickly, her voice emerging soft and urgent. Wait! Pequeña! Wait! The child did not hear her, did not slow, and Maria's pace quickened. Her heart hammering not from exertion but from a feeling she had carried like a stone in her chest for years. The profound, aching absence of the children she would never have. The motherhood that had been denied to her by biology and circumstance. All of it rose up now, transformed into fierce protectiveness for this stranger's daughter, who cried out for a father who could not hear. Maria dropped to her knees on the cold ground, ignoring the bite of gravel against her skin, and positioned herself at the child's eye level with the instinctive wisdom of someone who understood that terror looks even larger from below. The little girl was hyperventilating now, her chest heaving in sharp, rapid gasps that threatened to tip into full panic, her face flushed red and streaked with tears. Maria reached out slowly, telegraphing her movements, and placed her weathered hands gently on the child's small shoulders. Shh, mi amor. Shh, she whispered, her voice carrying the particular melody of comfort that transcends language, that speaks directly to the frightened animal inside every human heart. It is okay. You are safe. Está segura. The girl's wild eyes fixed on Maria's face, searching for something to anchor to in her storm of fear. I cannot find my daddy. She gasped out between hitching breaths, her voice climbing toward hysteria. I was hiding, and I ran too far, and now he is gone, and I do not know where I am. Maria's hands moved from the child's shoulders to cup her face with infinite gentleness, her thumbs brushing away tears that kept falling like rain. Breathe with me, pequeña. Breathe. Watch. Maria inhaled slowly, exaggerating the motion, making her chest rise visibly, then released the breath in a long, steady stream. Again, in, out, in, out. The girl tried to follow, her breath stuttering and uneven. But gradually, the rhythm began to calm. Without thinking, Maria shrugged off her threadbare coat, the only barrier between her and the October chill, and wrapped it around the girl's trembling shoulders. The coat swallowed the child's small frame, tattered and worn as it was, but it was warm from Maria's body heat, and that warmth was a kind of magic. What is your name, corazón? Maria asked softly, still holding the girl's gaze, refusing to let her slip back into panic. Emma, the child whispered. My name is Emma. Such a beautiful name, Maria said, and she smiled. A smile that had comforted crying children in every house she had ever cleaned. A smile born from a gift that had nowhere to live. Emma, your daddy is looking for you right now? I promise you this. Fathers do not stop looking. We will find him together, yes? You and me. You are not alone. Emma's sobs gradually quieted to hiccups, then to shuddering breaths, and finally to a fragile calm as Maria held her, rocking slightly the way mothers have rocked frightened children since the beginning of time. Maria could feel the girl's small heart beating like a trapped bird against her chest, could feel the tension slowly draining from the tiny body wrapped in her worn coat. After several minutes, Maria pulled back just enough to see Emma's face and said, I know a game. Do you want to see? Emma nodded, her eyes still wet, but curious now. The immediate terror receding like a tide, Maria held up her hands and began the simple pattern. The clapping game her own mother had taught her decades ago, in a kitchen that smelled of fresh tortillas and love. The rhythm was hypnotic, predictable, safe. Clap, clap, together, apart, cross, together. Emma watched with the intense focus of a child grasping for normalcy, and then, tentatively, she lifted her own small hands and tried to follow. She missed the pattern, her timing off, and a sound emerged from her throat that was half laugh, half sob. Maria smiled encouragement and slowed the rhythm, matching Emma's pace rather than forcing the child to match hers. Again they tried, and this time Emma's hands met Maria's at the right moment, and the girl's face broke into a tremulous smile that transformed her features like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "There," Maria said softly. "See? You are so clever, Emma." They moved to Maria's bench, sitting close together, and Emma burrowed into Maria's side as though they had known each other for years rather than minutes. In the gentle space Maria had created, Emma's story tumbled out in fragments. She and her daddy had been playing hide and seek. It was their special game. She had found the best hiding spot ever, behind the big rock near the pond. But then she had seen a rabbit and followed it, and suddenly nothing looked familiar, and she could not remember which way she had come, and her daddy's voice calling her name had sounded farther and farther away until she could not hear it anymore. Maria listened with her whole being, nodding, smoothing the girl's tangled curls with gentle fingers. "Your daddy is searching for you right now," Maria said with absolute certainty. "I promise you, Emma, he has not stopped looking for even 1 second. Daddies never stop, and I will stay with you until we find him. I will not leave you. You have my word." Daniel Whitmore stood motionless behind the broad trunk of an ancient oak tree, his expensive Italian shoes planted in the soft earth. His heart a complicated knot of emotions he could not name. He had been watching since the moment Emma had run past the maid on the bench. Watching as he had planned to watch, as he had needed to watch, because the world had become a place he no longer trusted, and his daughter was the only thing in it that still mattered. The game of hide and seek had been real, but Daniel had known exactly where Emma was the entire time. He had let her run just far enough to become disoriented, just far enough to be frightened, all while tracking her from a careful distance. It was a test, cruel perhaps, certainly desperate, but a test born from the paranoia that had consumed him in the year since his wife Catherine had died, 42 years old, and he trusted nothing and no one anymore. His wealth had revealed itself to be a magnet for false smiles and calculated kindness. Business associates who expressed sympathy while angling for advantage. Friends who disappeared when grief made him poor company. Even the nannies he had hired, supposedly devoted caregivers, whom his investigators had discovered stealing, gossiping, treating Emma with dutiful coldness the moment Daniel left the room. He had needed to know what would happen if Emma appeared vulnerable and alone. Would people help her? Would they ignore her? Would someone try to take advantage? To abduct her? To hold her for ransom? These thoughts plagued him in the dark hours of night when Emma slept and he lay awake, terrified of a world that seemed designed to take everything he loved. But what he was witnessing now, what he had been watching for the past 10 minutes, defied every cynical expectation his grief had constructed. The woman kneeling before his daughter was clearly poor, her clothes shabby, her coat threadbare, yet she had wrapped that coat around Emma without hesitation. She had not looked around for cameras or witnesses. She had not calculated advantage. She had simply acted, moving with a grace and gentleness that reminded Daniel, painfully, of Catherine. He watched her wipe Emma's tears, watched her play some kind of hand game that made his daughter smile, watched her hold Emma with the tenderness of someone who genuinely cared, and something long frozen in Daniel's chest began, against his will, to crack. Emma's stomach rumbled softly, a small sound that Maria's ears, trained by years of noticing the needs of others, caught immediately. From her worn canvas bag, Maria pulled out one of her 2 remaining granola bars, the cheap kind that tasted more of cardboard than oats. But it was food, and food was meant to be shared. "Here, pequeña," she said, unwrapping it and breaking it carefully in half, offering the larger piece to Emma. The girl took it with both hands, the automatic thank you of good upbringing emerging from her lips, and they ate together in companionable silence, two souls sharing a meager feast on a park bench as the October light turned golden. When they had finished, Emma settled back against Maria's side. And Maria found herself telling a story, the words flowing without plan or preparation. "Once there was a little bird," she began, her voice taking on the lilting quality of fables, "who was afraid to fly. All the other birds soared high into the sky, but this little bird looked down at the ground so far below and was too frightened to spread her wings. But one day, a great wind came, and the little bird had to choose. Stay on the branch and be blown away, or trust her wings and fly. And do you know what happened?" Emma shook her head, her eyes wide and fixed on Maria's face. "She jumped," Maria said softly, "and her wings knew what to do. They had always known. She just had to be brave enough to let them work. Sometimes being brave is not about not being scared. It is about doing the right thing even when you are scared." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this, and then she asked with the devastating directness of children, "Do you have little birds of your own? Do you have children?" The question pierced Maria in a place she had learned to protect, and her face must have betrayed something because Emma's expression immediately filled with concern. Maria swallowed hard, feeling the familiar ache bloom in her chest. The grief that never fully healed, only scabbed over until moments like this reopened it. "No, mi amor," she said quietly, her voice catching just slightly. "I cannot have children. My body, it does not work that way. But I would have loved to be a mama. I would have loved that more than anything in the world." Emma reached up with one small hand and touched Maria's cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossibly wise for 7 years. "I think you would be the best mama," she whispered, and in that moment something profound and unspoken passed between them. A recognition of loss and longing, a connection that transcended the vast distance between their worlds. The park had grown busier as the evening approached, filling with joggers completing their routes and professionals taking shortcuts home from work. Several people passed Maria's bench, and more than one pair of eyes lingered on the tableau before them with unmistakable suspicion. A poorly dressed woman, clearly a member of the working class, sitting intimately close to a child who radiated privilege from her expensive coat to her polished shoes. The glances carried judgment, calculation, concern of the wrong kind. One woman in athletic wear slowed her jog, her phone already in her hand as though preparing to dial some authority. A man in a business suit paused on the path. His eyes narrowed, his body language protective in a way that cast Maria as threat rather than savior. Maria felt each look like a small blade, felt the familiar sting of being seen and simultaneously misunderstood, of being judged by her worn coat and tired face rather than by her actions or her heart. But she did not let the judgment touch Emma. She kept her arm around the girl's shoulders, kept her voice soft and steady, kept her focus entirely on this child who had been entrusted to her care by circumstance and need. She had spent 8 years being invisible. She could endure another few minutes of being visible in the wrong way. Then, cutting through the ambient sounds of the park, came a voice, deep and urgent, and edged with carefully controlled panic. "Emma! Emma! Where are you?" The girl's head snapped up, her entire body suddenly alert, and her face transformed with joy and relief so pure it was almost painful to witness. "Daddy!" she cried, and she was off the bench in an instant, Maria's coat falling from her shoulders onto the weathered wood. She ran toward the voice, toward the tall figure emerging from behind the cluster of oak trees, a man in an immaculate charcoal suit whose polished exterior could not quite hide the tension in his shoulders and the fear in his stride. "Emma!" Daniel called again, and then she was in his arms, and he was lifting her, holding her against his chest, as though she were made of something both precious and fragile. Maria stood slowly, retrieving her coat from the bench, wrapping it around her own shoulders against the chill she had not allowed herself to feel, while Emma needed its warmth. She gathered her bag, slipped her swollen feet back into her shoes, and prepared to fade back into the invisibility that was her natural state. Her bus would be arriving soon. Her work was done here. She had helped a lost child find her father. And that was enough. More than enough. She smiled, a small private smile of relief and release, and turned to walk away, to let this father and daughter have their reunion without the intrusion of a stranger's presence. Maria had taken perhaps 3 steps when his voice stopped her, formal and controlled in a way that made her shoulders tense. "Excuse me, miss. Please wait." She turned slowly, and the man was approaching with Emma still wrapped around him like a vine. The girl's face buried in his neck. He was handsome in the way wealthy men often are, with features sharpened by good nutrition and expensive grooming, his dark hair silvered at the temples, his jaw strong and clean-shaven. But it was his eyes that held Maria's attention, gray-blue and penetrating, studying her with an intensity that felt less like gratitude and more like examination. "I want to thank you," he said. His voice measured, each word precisely placed. "For staying with my daughter." Emma had lifted her head and was looking at Maria with open affection. But her father's expression remained guarded, almost clinical, as though Maria were a specimen he needed to analyze before reaching a conclusion. Maria clasped her hands in front of her, a gesture of humility that had become second nature after years of service. "It was nothing, señor," she said quietly, her accent more pronounced now in her nervousness. "Any person would do the same." She was frightened. "I only stayed with her until you came." His eyes moved from her face to her worn coat, to her shabby bag, to her second-hand shoes, and Maria felt the assessment like a physical touch, felt herself being categorized and filed away. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a wallet of soft black leather. "Please," he said, pulling out several bills without even looking at them. "Let me give you something for your time, for your kindness." The words hit Maria like a slap, and her spine straightened, her chin lifting with a dignity that poverty had tried but failed to strip away. "No," she said firmly, and something flashed in her eyes that made Daniel Whitmore pause mid-motion. "I do not want money for helping a child. She is safe. That is enough." "But surely," Daniel pressed, his tone still careful, still suspicious, and Maria could see it now, could see that he did not trust her, did not trust this moment, was waiting for her to reveal some ulterior motive, some angle, some scheme. The realization stung more than it should have. She had learned long ago that people like him looked at people like her and saw only need, only grasping hands and calculated kindness. "Thank you, no," Maria repeated, her voice quiet but unyielding. She nodded once, picked up her worn bag, and turned away before the burning in her eyes could become something visible, something that would humiliate her further. Daniel Whitmore could not stop thinking about the woman in the park. That night, after Emma had finally fallen asleep clutching the stuffed rabbit she had not held since her mother's death, Daniel sat in his home office surrounded by the trappings of his success and felt their emptiness more acutely than ever. The woman's face haunted him. The way she had refused his money with an almost wounded pride, the gentleness in her weathered hands as she had comforted Emma, the threadbare coat she had wrapped around his daughter without a moment's hesitation. By dawn, he had made a decision that some part of him recognized as an invasion, but that his need to understand compelled him toward anyway. He called his assistant Marcus, a man whose discretion and efficiency Daniel paid handsomely for, and gave him the few details he had. A woman, Hispanic, early to mid-30s, cleaning the park area around 6 in the evening, worn gray dress that might be a uniform. It took Marcus less than 4 hours to return with a file that Daniel read with growing disbelief and something that felt uncomfortably like shame. Maria Rodriguez, 34 years old, emigrated from Mexico 8 years ago. Works as a house cleaner for 3 different services, pulling shifts that began at 5 in the morning and often ended past midnight. Lives alone in a studio apartment in a neighborhood where Daniel would never venture after dark. No criminal record, no debt beyond basic survival. And then the details that made Daniel's chest tighten. Her mother, Rosa, 68 years old, living in Guadalajara with congestive heart failure. Maria sends home nearly 70% of her income for medical expenses. She has no savings account, no car, no health insurance of her own. The file included a note from one of Marcus's contacts, a woman named Mrs. Peterson who had employed Maria that very afternoon. The report stated that Maria had broken a vase, a cheap ceramic piece worth perhaps $15, and had been docked $50 from her pay without protest. Daniel sat back in his leather chair, the file open on his mahogany desk, and felt something crack inside the carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart. This woman, who had virtually nothing, who had been cheated and exploited mere hours before their encounter, had wrapped her only coat around his daughter and refused his money with dignity that shamed him. Emma would not stop talking about the nice lady. At breakfast the morning after the park, she asked if they could go back and find her. During the car ride to school, she wondered aloud if the lady had stayed warm without her coat. At dinner that evening, she recounted for the third time how the lady had told her the story about the brave little bird, her small voice animated in a way Daniel had not heard in so long, he had almost forgotten what it sounded like. The nice lady said being brave means doing the right thing even when you are scared, Emma said, pushing peas around her plate, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. Daddy, do you think we will see her again? Can we go look for her? Daniel watched his daughter across the expanse of their dining table, a table that could seat 12 but only ever held 2 now, and felt something shift in the landscape of his grief. Emma was smiling, not the polite, dutiful smile she had learned to wear like armor over the past year, but a real smile, unguarded and genuine, the kind that reached her eyes and made them bright. He had not seen that smile since before Catherine's death, had begun to fear he might never see it again. His daughter, who had retreated into silence and nightmares after losing her mother, who flinched at loud noises and clung to him with desperate intensity, had talked about the park lady with an ease and joy that pierced him to his core. That night Daniel made a decision as he stood in the doorway of Emma's room, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks. He needed to see Maria Rodriguez again, not to test her this time, not to satisfy his paranoia, but because something in that brief encounter had reached his daughter in a way nothing and no one else had managed. But he also needed to understand, needed to know who this woman truly was beneath the surface impression of poverty and kindness. His investigator's file had given him facts, but facts were not the same as truth. He wanted to see her in her natural environment, to observe how she moved through the world, to determine if her gentleness with Emma had been genuine or performance. The thought made him uncomfortable, made him question his own motives and methods, but the image of Emma's smile, real and radiant, overrode his doubts. He would find a way to bring Maria Rodriguez back into their lives, but he would do it carefully, quietly, in a way that would reveal her character beyond any doubt. The call came through Elite Property Services on a Thursday morning, a cleaning agency Maria had applied to months ago, but had never heard back from. They had a client, they said, a very particular client who required someone with excellent references and attention to detail. The pay was double her usual rate. The house was in Riverside Heights, the neighborhood where Maria had only ever traveled to clean, never to live. She accepted before they had finished describing the position. Daniel had orchestrated it carefully, using a property management company his corporation owned, but that operated under a different name, ensuring there would be no direct line connecting him to the hire. He told himself it was caution, due diligence. But some deeper part of him knew it was cowardice, a way to observe without being observed, to judge without being judged in return. When Maria arrived at the address the following Monday morning, she stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, simply staring. The mansion rose before her like something from a dream or a film. All pale stone and towering windows, surrounded by manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than Maria earned in a year. The iron gate had opened automatically when she pressed the call button, and she walked up the curved driveway feeling small and out of place, her cleaning supplies clutched in her worn canvas bag. The house manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Chen, met her at the service entrance and provided instructions in clipped, efficient sentences. The family was in residence but valued privacy. Maria was to clean the main living areas, the kitchen, and the library. She was not to disturb anything in the bedrooms. She was to be invisible and thorough. Maria nodded, understanding perfectly. She had been both those things for 8 years. As she moved through the rooms, Maria felt as though she had stepped into another universe. Marble floors stretched beneath her feet. Crystal chandeliers caught the morning light and scattered it like diamonds. Artwork that might have hung in museums graced walls painted in colors she could not name. But rather than making her resentful or careless, the overwhelming beauty made Maria even more meticulous. She dusted each surface as though it were sacred. She polished each fixture until it gleamed. She treated every object, from the smallest decorative box to the grandest sculpture, with reverence and care. In his home office on the second floor, Daniel watched her on the security monitors, ostensibly reviewing documents, but unable to focus on anything except the figure moving through his home with quiet grace and unwavering dedication. Maria was on her knees in the grand foyer, carefully polishing the dark wood of a console table, when the front door burst open and the sound of a child's laughter filled the cavernous space. She looked up reflexively, and her heart stopped. Emma. The girl stood frozen in the doorway, her school bag sliding from her shoulder to the marble floor with a soft thud, her eyes wide and disbelieving. Then her face transformed, lit from within by pure joy, and she screamed, "The nice lady! The nice lady! Daddy, she is here!" And she was running, her patent leather shoes clattering against the floor, and her arms outstretched. Maria barely had time to rise before Emma crashed into her, wrapping small arms around her waist with fierce intensity. And Maria's mind reeled, struggling to understand what was happening, how this child from the park could be here, in this house, calling for her daddy. She looked down at Emma's blonde curls pressed against her gray uniform, then slowly raised her eyes to survey her surroundings with new understanding. The expensive coat Emma had worn that day, the polished shoes, the careful grooming, the evidence had been there all along. This was Emma's home. This impossible palace was where this little girl lived. Maria's hands trembled as they automatically moved to stroke Emma's hair, even as her mind raced forward. Connecting pieces she had been too tired, too focused on comfort to see clearly before. And then she heard footsteps on the grand staircase, measured and deliberate, and she looked up to see him descending. Daniel Whitmore, Emma's father, the man from the park. He wore different clothes now, casual expensive things that probably cost more than Maria earned in a month, but his face was the same, those penetrating gray-blue eyes watching her with an expression she could not read. Understanding crashed over Maria like a wave of ice water. This was not coincidence. This was not chance. He had arranged this, had orchestrated her hiring, had brought her into his home under false pretenses to observe her, to test her again, to see if her kindness in the park had been real or performance. She felt something crack inside her chest, something that might have been hope or might have been the last fragile piece of her dignity. Her arms tightened protectively around Emma, even as she felt herself pulling away internally, retreating behind walls built by years of being looked through and looked down upon. But this felt worse than invisibility. This felt like violation. Maria gently disentangled herself from Emma's embrace, her movements deliberate and controlled. And when she straightened to her full height, there was something in her bearing that made Daniel pause on the bottom step. "You knew," Maria said, her voice quiet but carrying an edge sharp as broken glass. "You knew who I was. You brought me here, to your home, without telling me. You made me believe this was a real job, that someone finally saw my work and valued it, when really this was just another test." Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them together in front of her, pressing hard enough that her knuckles went white. Emma looked between them, confusion clouding her features, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Daniel took a step forward, his hand raised in a gesture that might have been placating or pleading. "Please, let me explain. I needed to know. I needed to be sure that you were." Maria's voice cut through his like a knife. "That I was what, senor? Trustworthy, genuine?" Not a thief or a kidnapper or someone who would hurt your daughter. She felt heat rising in her chest, burning away the cold shock, transforming into something fierce and righteous. I comforted a frightened child because that is what any decent person does. Not for money, not for reward, not to impress anyone. Because she needed help, and I had hands that could help her. But that was not enough for you, was it? You had to test me again. To watch me like I am some kind of experiment. Daniel's face was pale now, tension visible in every line of his body. My wife died, he said, his voice raw in a way that made it clear the words cost him. A year ago, and since then everyone who has come into our lives has had an agenda, has wanted something, has pretended to care about Emma to get close to my money, my connections, my resources. I have had nannies steal from us, friends betray confidences, business partners try to exploit my grief. I could not. I cannot let someone into Emma's life without knowing they are safe. Maria felt her anger falter, just slightly. Because she understood loss, understood fear, understood the walls people built to protect what little they had left. But understanding did not erase the hurt. I am sorry for your loss, Signor, she said quietly. I am sorry that people have treated you this way. But trust cannot be manufactured. It cannot be tested into existence. Either you believe in someone's heart or you do not. She bent to pick up her bag, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall while he was watching. Emma's cry shattered the tense silence like glass breaking. No, 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 please do not go. The girl threw herself between Maria and the door, her small body trembling, tears streaming down her face with the kind of abandon only children can manage. Tears that held nothing back, that came from a well of grief too deep for someone so young to carry. Maria, please. I need you. Please do not leave me. Maria froze, her bag half lifted, and felt her carefully constructed composure crumble. She dropped to her knees instinctively, reaching for Emma even as her mind told her she should walk away, should preserve what remained of her dignity. But this child, this precious child, was sobbing with a desperation that went beyond the moment, beyond this confrontation, reaching down into something older and darker. You make me feel safe, Emma gasped between sobs, her small hands clutching at Maria's uniform. You are kind, like Mommy was kind. Your voice sounds like when she used to sing to me. When you hold me, I can breathe again. Maria's heart fractured. She pulled Emma close, her own tears finally breaking free, sliding hot and silent down her cheeks. Behind them, Daniel stood paralyzed, watching his daughter express emotions she had kept locked away for a year, watching her reach for this woman with a need he had not been able to satisfy despite all his love and resources. I have nightmares every night, Emma whispered into Maria's shoulder, her voice muffled and broken. Every night I dream that Mommy is leaving, and I cannot stop her. And I wake up, and I am so scared. And Daddy tries to help, but he is sad too, and I do not know how to be brave anymore. But after the park, after you told me the story about the little bird, I remembered your voice, and it helped. When I was scared, I pretended you were there, telling me to be brave, to trust my wings. Please do not go. Please. I do not have anyone who makes me feel like you do. Maria's breath came in shuddering gasps as she held this child who had somehow, impossibly, found in her something she had always wanted to give, the motherhood that had been denied her now manifesting in the most unexpected way. She looked up at Daniel through her tears and saw that his face was wet too, his careful control finally shattered by his daughter's raw honesty. Maria had stayed for another hour that afternoon, her departure postponed by Emma's desperate pleas and Daniel's quiet request for time to explain himself properly. But eventually she had left, promising Emma she would think about everything, her heart heavy and confused as she rode the bus back to her small apartment. She had barely removed her coat when her phone rang, a number she did not recognize flashing on the cracked screen. The voice on the other end was Daniel's. Stripped of all control, all composure, ragged with fear. Please, please come. Emma is. She cannot breathe. She is screaming and I do not know what to do. I have tried everything and she is asking for you. Please, I will send a car. Please." Maria did not hesitate. She was out the door before he finished speaking. Taking a taxi she could not afford because it was faster than the bus. Her hands clenched in her lap as the driver navigated through evening traffic toward Riverside Heights. When she arrived, Daniel met her at the door. His hair disheveled, his shirt untucked, his eyes wild with helplessness. "She is in her room," he said. And Maria could hear it now. The high, keening wail of a child in complete panic. A sound that made every protective instinct in her body surge forward. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time, following the sound to a bedroom decorated in soft purples and whites, where Emma thrashed on her bed, gasping for air that would not come, her face red and soaked with tears, her small body rigid with terror. Maria went to her without thought, without plan, moving on pure instinct. She gathered Emma into her arms, holding her firmly but gently, and began to hum, a melody her own mother had hummed to her in childhood, wordless and soothing and old as memory. She rocked slowly, her cheek pressed against Emma's damp hair, and whispered in Spanish and English, a river of soft reassurance. "Estás aquí, mi amor. You are safe. I am here. I have you. Breathe with me, pequeña. Feel my heart. Match your breath to mine." Slowly, so slowly, Emma's gasping eased. Her rigid body softened, her sobs quieted to hiccups, then to shuddering breaths. Then finally, to the deep, exhausted rhythm of sleep. Maria continued to hold her, continued to rock. And when she looked up, she found Daniel standing in the doorway, tears running unchecked down his face, watching his daughter find peace in the arms of a woman he had tested and doubted and failed to trust. Maria carried Emma to the bed and laid her down gently, tucking the covers around her small form. And then she settled into the chair beside the bed, unwilling to leave while the child might still need her. Daniel brought a second chair from the hallway and positioned it on the other side of Emma's bed. And there they sat as the night deepened outside the windows. 2 broken people keeping vigil over a sleeping child. For a long time neither spoke, the silence between them filled only with Emma's steady breathing, and then Daniel's voice emerged, low and raw. Her name was Catherine, my wife. She had a brain aneurysm. She was laughing at something Emma said at breakfast, and then she collapsed, and by the time the ambulance arrived, she was gone. 40 years old, healthy, happy, and then just gone, like a light switching off. Maria listened, her hands folded in her lap, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that could make that better. Daniel continued, the words spilling out as though a dam had broken. "I do not know how to be enough for Emma. Catherine was the warmth in our house, the light, the heart of everything. I am just the structure, the walls, the foundation. I can provide for Emma materially, but I cannot give her what her mother gave her. And I am so afraid, every moment of every day, that something will take her from me too, that I will lose the only thing I have left that matters." He looked at Maria across Emma's sleeping form. "That is why I tested you. That is why I could not just trust. Because trust feels like leaving a door unlocked when there are wolves outside." Maria understood, and she told him so, and then she found herself speaking too, her own story emerging in the darkness. "I was told when I was 26 that I could never have children," she said softly. "Something wrong with my body, something broken inside. And I mourned for years, mourned for babies I would never hold, for the mother I would never become. Then my husband left because he wanted children more than he wanted me. I came to this country with nothing, rebuilt a life from cleaning and scrubbing and being invisible. My mother is dying slowly in Guadalajara, and I cannot be with her because if I leave I cannot come back. Every dollar I send her is a dollar I do not eat. Every dream I had has been deferred so long I am not sure I remember what they were." She looked at Daniel and saw recognition in his eyes. Saw that he understood the particular loneliness of carrying on when the life you planned has been stripped away. "We are both haunted," she said quietly. "You by loss, me by absence. But we are still here, still fighting, still trying to protect what matters." In that moment, across the body of a sleeping child who needed them both, something shifted between them, a recognition of shared strength forged in separate fires, a respect that transcended wealth and poverty and the vast distance between their worlds. As dawn began to paint the windows with pale light, Daniel spoke again, his voice tentative in a way that suggested he had been rehearsing these words for hours. "I want to offer you a position, not as a housekeeper, as Emma's nanny, as part of our household, a proper salary, health insurance, your own room here if you want it, or an apartment nearby if you prefer. And I want to bring your mother here, to the United States. I will pay for her medical care, for her visa, for everything she needs." Maria's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. She opened her mouth but no words emerged, and Daniel continued quickly, as though afraid if he stopped he would lose courage. "This is not charity. This is not guilt. This is need, Maria. My daughter needs you. I saw that tonight. I saw how she calms in your arms in a way she has not calmed for anyone since Catherine died. And maybe I need you too. Need someone who understands loss, but has not let it make them hard or cold or cynical." Maria's mind raced, spinning through possibilities and impossibilities, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "It is too much," she whispered. "No one gives so much for nothing. There must be something you want. Some expectation." Daniel shook his head slowly. "What I want is for my daughter to smile again, to sleep without nightmares, to have someone in her life who sees her and loves her for who she is, rather than what she represents. If that makes me selfish, then I am selfish. But I am not asking you to be grateful. I am asking you to consider whether this might be good for you too, whether bringing your mother here, whether having stability and security, whether being able to mother a child even if she is not yours by blood, might be something you want." Maria looked down at Emma's peaceful face, then up at Daniel's exhausted, hope-filled eyes, and felt something fundamental shift inside her understanding of the world. This was not a transaction. This was not employer and employee. This was three people, each carrying wounds that would never fully heal, recognizing that perhaps together they could build something that resembled wholeness. "My mother," Maria said, her voice breaking. "I could see my mother again." "Yes," Daniel said simply. "Family," Maria whispered, testing the word, tasting its shape. "Yes," Daniel repeated. "Family." 6 months passed like a dream, slowly becoming real. Maria had her own suite of rooms in the west wing of the house, decorated simply but comfortably, and each morning she woke not to the shrill cry of an alarm clock in a cold apartment, but to sunlight streaming through curtains that actually blocked the draft, and to the sound of Emma's laughter somewhere in the house. She had learned that wealth could not buy happiness, but it could buy time and peace and the space for happiness to grow. Emma had bloomed like a flower, finally given water and Sunday. The nightmares came rarely now, and when they did, Maria was there, just down the hall, ready with soft words and steady arms. The girl smiled easily, laughed often, and had begun to talk about her mother with joy rather than only grief. Remembering the love instead of only the loss. Daniel had changed too. The hard, suspicious edges of his grief softening into something gentler, something that looked almost like contentment. He had learned to trust again, slowly and carefully, and in trusting Maria he had begun to trust the world just a little bit more. And then, on a bright April morning, Maria's mother arrived. Rosa Rodriguez stepped off the plane with tears streaming down her face. Her heart strong again thanks to treatments Maria could never have afforded alone. And when Maria ran to her in the airport, when they held each other and wept again, Daniel and Emma stood back and witnessed a reunion that made their own unconventional family feel complete. Today was Emma's 8th birthday, and the celebration was small and perfect. No grand party with hundreds of acquaintances, just the 4 of them and a few of Emma's closest school friends in the garden, with a cake that Rosa had baked using Catherine's recipe that Daniel had quietly shared. Maria watched Emma blow out her candles, watched Daniel's arm settle naturally around Rosa's shoulders as the older woman dabbed at happy tears, and felt something vast and warm expand in her chest. They had returned to the park that afternoon, the same park where everything had changed. Emma played on the swings while Maria pushed her higher and higher, both of them laughing as the autumn wind whipped their hair. Daniel sat on Maria's old bench with Rosa, the two of them talking easily in the way of people who understood that family was not only blood, but choice and circumstance, and love deliberately given. Maria looked at them, looked at Emma soaring through the air with her arms spread wide like the brave little bird from the story, and understood that sometimes one moment of kindness, one choice to see another person's humanity, could crack open the whole world and let the light pour in. This was where it had all begun, on a cold October afternoon when a poor maid had comforted a terrified child. And now, 6 months later, they were all finally home.